Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator with Mid-Ohio Psychological Services. Today, I am meeting with Anna for our fourth and final Parent Pep Talk, Safe Social Media Use, which I think is great for the summer months currently. So Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Anna Schwartz. I am a licensed professional clinical counselor and supervisor in the state of Ohio. I've been working at Mid-Ohio Psychological Services for about 8 years, and I serve as the clinical manager in our Franklin County office.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. So our Parent Pep Talk is paid for through grant funding for the Columbus Foundation, so a big shout out to them. And we're just going to get into it. So my first question for you, Anna, is what is social media?
Yes, so social media includes a lot of different apps, and just to name a few, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Kick Messenger, Discord, YouTube, Tumblr. Those are just a few. But essentially, social media is any app that is designed to allow users to post images or video or text about their lives. And then for that user to also view images, videos, and text about other people's lives.
Awesome. Thank you. So what is play-based childhood compared to a phone-based childhood?
Yeah, great question. So, a play based childhood is one in which children and adolescents play in person with one another or in groups, outside or inside, for extended periods of time, so hours together. And a key part of that is that a lot of times that play is unsupervised. So, adults may be near, accessible, but the kids really have alone time to interact with their peers. During this time, hopefully they're playing independently, using imagination skills, exploring nature. Some of the really big, important pieces of a play-based childhood are when kids are able to create rules for their groups. And like all rules, they get broken at times. And this allows kids an opportunity to resolve conflict and build and mend relationships, which we know is really important in adult relationships and work environments as we age. A phone-based childhood, conversely, is one where children and adolescents spend significantly less time with their peers. More time is spent here scrolling on the phone and typing, so there's less face-to-face interaction. Generally, then, like less time is unsupervised because each person can play in their own house, play being kind of the operative word there. And they're engaging in activities on their phones, their tablets, or their devices. So they're scrolling and kind of zoning out to blue light. This whole concept of play-based childhood and phone-based childhood is one that Jonathan Haidt talks about in a really fabulous book I'm going to mention at the end of today. But he talks about how this phone-based childhood really emerged in 2007 when iPhones and smartphones with internet became really popular. And people going through adolescence and early adolescence, so that tween population in the early 2010s, were the first generation to have spent a lot of their childhood on their phone. So they're really the first generation that we've seen deeply engaged in this phone-based childhood.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I know it is so interesting that we're kind of in a little bit of uncharted territory right now, because I remember growing up, we didn't have cell phones. So the only option was to go play outside.
Knock on someone's door. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Is Sally home? Yeah.
Absolutely. I was joking with kids and I was telling them that, when I grew up, you couldn't be on the phone and the computer at the same time. And they did not believe me. They were like, you were lying. There is no way that's the case. And I was like, I promise.
Yeah.
I promise it was different back then. Great. So what do you think the pros and cons of children and adolescents using social media?
Yeah, and I think it's good to talk about. There are some pros and cons. Some of the pros include, there really is a lot of stuff on social media and the internet as a whole that can be educational, and it can ignite interests and passions for children and adolescents. There's I talk to younger people, and the things that they can do with internet and technology as a whole, like, blows my mind. They can be really creative and create some awesome projects and advanced technology for future generations. There's also a way for, kids to remain connected with people that may be physically distant from them, or, especially for minority groups, right? We've seen some youth be able to connect with other individuals that may have like a chronic illness similar to them, or people that may experience some bullying or lack of acceptance in their school or their neighborhood, may be able to find other people online that they can connect with. So there are definitely some pros. There are, however, also some cons. One of those being that children and adolescents really need this free play that I talked about in that phone-based versus play-based childhood. And this might sound a little scary for some parents to hear, but unsupervised play is also really helpful. That is how kids learn to take age-appropriate risks. That's how they learn to resolve conflict, and they learn decision-making skills, conflict resolution skills, and some independence. And social media has been found to be impacting some of that, because you're very sedentary. You're not out in the world climbing a tree, figuring out how high is too high on that tree, where are my limits, things of that nature. Social media is also inherently comparative, and there's a lot of things on social media that encourage people to like or dislike. So giving a picture or a video a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And this has been found to impact mental health and self-esteem and self-efficacy of children and adolescents. So that can be a con at times. Social media is also pretty passive, right? You can scroll past something you immediately don't like. You don't have to ask questions or engage necessarily. There are also, from that book that I'm going to mention later, which is called The Anxious Generation, there are also a lot of, there's kind of 4 main problems with social media. One of those is social deprivation, right? People are alone. They're not engaging with their peers out in the real world. There's been a lot of research on sleep deprivation, that we know the screens are addicting. I mean, I know when I'm on it, I'm like, okay, just a few more scrolls, right? It's very easy to do. It also can greatly impact attention fragmentation, right? So the number of notifications that kids, all of us, really get on our phones every day. I mean, we're constantly working on one thing and are distracted with something else. So that is a really big impact. And addiction, right? Social media releases dopamine. It's something that feels good. There's a feeling of satisfaction when we do that. Especially if you're someone that's getting a lot of thumbs up and likes on your thing, on your posts, right? Things you may be saying. So the need for more dopamine and the withdrawal when it's not there is a very real thing for, the younger generations that have been using the internet and social media for majority of their life.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was such good information. I think it's so interesting how, there are so many good pros, but also so many good cons. Like, it can bring people together who might not have been together. You can find your little group of people who, feel like have the same interest and like know how you feel. But then there's also the complete opposite of that, to where I think maybe there is some benefit sometimes to being around people, to have kind of that conflict, to learn those conflict resolution skills.
Yeah. Like everything in moderation, right?
Absolutely. I am definitely guilty of scrolling as well. So I am not any better than anybody else. I try to limit myself.
We all are. It's okay.
Right. Absolutely.
Myself included.
Right. So what can you tell us about safety on social media?
Yeah. So unfortunately, there isn't too much inherently built into the internet or social media sites to keep children and adolescents safe. Most social media sites have an age restriction, right? Where when someone is creating an account, they have to put in their birth date to show, typically the age is 13, that they're 13 or older. Unfortunately, there are very minimal checks to make sure that the data or the date that this person is putting in is actually accurate. So there's some things coming down in legislation to actually change some of that, to require social media platforms to verify that better so that we don't have people under the age of 13 creating accounts, which could be a really positive thing. Another thing to think about is who picked the age 13, right? I don't know the answer to that question about who picked that, but I'm not sure that 13 is the right age for social media. And it's important to differentiate here that I'm not talking about all internet use, right? Because we know that our students are using the internet for projects and for academic purposes, which is very beneficial to that. But with social media specifically, the age of 13 is the age that the apps have. And some parents might think a little bit about, is my 13-year-old really mature enough for that? Or is waiting until they're 15 or 16 potentially a bit more helpful for their development? There is also like a really large amount of older adults who sometimes unfortunately pose as younger individuals on social media apps and may take advantage of children and adolescents. So when we're thinking about safety, there are also no mechanisms that allow, only the adolescents to talk to one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
Adults can be talking to adolescents. Adolescents can initiate conversations with adults. And there's also no geographical settings, right? So a child on there, an adolescent on a social media app may be talking to someone in another country, in another state, which just, again, broadens risk of who your child may be interacting with. And finally, the other thing that is sometimes concerning about social media is that there aren't a lot of ways to filter what your child sees on their feed. And their feed is really, when you open up the Instagram app or the TikTok app or, whatever app that might be, the app is going to present you with content, right? So someone else's videos or images or text that they've presented. And there isn't a way to filter that really. So the algorithm is going to start to understand what your teen is interested in, and it is going to find things from all over the web to put on there. And that can be a little concerning at times, that maybe not all of that content is age appropriate. So something to talk to your teens about as well.
Honestly, that was such great information, and social media can definitely be scary, especially because you don't know who you're talking to sometimes. And like I knew if parent controls were in place, or they have like YouTube Kids or Netflix Kids, but I never thought about the algorithm part of it, especially if a kid saw something inappropriate and then interacted with it, because then that just makes their For You page turn into that topic. So I never thought about that, but that was such a great point. So what guidelines do you suggest for making social media use as safe as possible for kids?
So despite some of those, scary or concerning things we've talked about, there are things that parents and guardians can do to set some guidelines, right? One of those, like you mentioned, Jennifer, is to learn about parental controls. Now, we know there are always going to be kids that maybe know how to outdo the parental controls, but there are some content filters and parental controls that you can put in place. So I would really encourage parents to look into those on an app by app basis, right? So Facebook might have something different than TikTok or Kick Messenger or Tumblr. And then there are also parental controls that you can put on the device, that may come from Verizon or AT&T about what can be downloaded and what can't be downloaded. So that would be something to look into. I wish I could give a little bit more specific information, but every device and every cellular carrier, every app is going to be a little bit different. So that does really put the responsibility on the parents to do the research. Another thing is, I think, focus on maximizing and creating a lot of opportunity for your youth to engage in in-person activities, right? If there isn't, or if there aren't a lot of those options available, the phone and the tablet do become what's readily available, right? It's pretty much always by us. We can pick it up. But if we're personally engaging in these activities with our kids too, and setting that tone from, as young as possible, making it a norm, I think that helps draw a bit of the focus off of the phone and the devices and the screens. I think it's also helpful to consider kind of a multi-level approach to internet and social media use, right? So when children are younger, focusing on educational programs and sites that they may use. As they get a little bit older, setting more of those parental controls and monitoring things. Maybe it's possible in middle school for, an adolescent to have a phone that they're going to think is very lame, but they're the phones that you and I had, Jennifer, where you can just text and call, right? Maybe it doesn't have access to the internet, so that your youth, when they're out doing their unsupervised play with their friends, can still get a hold of you or 911 if they have an emergency, but they don't have access to the entire world and the entire web in their pocket at all times. And, my recommendation would be to, as long as you can, hold off on social media use. And if you can, don't begin that until the age of 16, when decision-making skills are better, and some very critical developmental periods are mostly completed. Additionally, I think if we can talk to our kids in a cool, calm, collected, and honest way about our concerns about social media and find places for compromise, I think that's going to set us up for success, and ideally set our relationship with them up for success, where things are discussable and we can disagree on things, and both of us can present our data and our research and talk about it, and hopefully come to a conclusion or an option that works for everyone. And finally, this is a hard one, but I think it's important for parents to monitor their own social media and screen use, right? Mm-hmm. It's a little hypocritical if we're saying, get off the phone. But every time they come to find us, our head is hanging down and we're scrolling on some device. So what are we doing to minimize or reduce our own use, and using that additional free time to connect with our kids and create those in-person opportunities for them?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think that you brought up a very good point about parents and social media use, because your kids will, they'll follow your example, they'll follow your lead. So you can't expect them to do things that you do yourself. Granted, I will say it's not always, they're on Facebook, they could be paying bills, they could be doing emails. So it's not always fun stuff, but, still, if your head's down, like, your kid doesn't know the difference between, I'm paying my bill right now and I'm on Facebook.
Exactly.
And I really also liked how you brought up the connecting part of it. Like, trying to just really communicate with your kid and connect with them when talking about social media safety. Because then, opening that, two-way street for communication, if they do see something that, is inappropriate, they'll be more likely to come talk to you about it versus, just ignoring it or, continuing to go towards that, whatever it may be.
Yeah,
so that's
a great point.
Absolutely. So what resources can you recommend to parents to learn more about safe social media use?
Yeah. My biggest recommendation, really my number one suggestion, is this book that I referenced called The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness, by Jonathan Haidt, who I mentioned at the beginning. He has written a lot of really interesting books about humanity and different specific sociological, social psychology topics over time. This is a book he just released last year. And not only does it really give you the history of how this addiction and over-reliance on social media and the internet has happened, but he provides a really, really helpful framework and suggestions at the end about what schools can do to help with phone usage and to encourage learning, what parents can do at different age ranges. So what can parents of a 0 to 5-year-old do? What can parents of elementary and middle schoolers do? And what can parents of high schoolers do? This book is in public libraries. It is on Amazon. Most public libraries also have audiobook versions of this. So if you feel like you don't have time to sit down and read, can you listen to it while you're at the grocery store? Can you listen to it in the car while you're going to pick your kid up from that play-based activity? I think that is a really great place to start. And then at the end of his book, he has a bunch of other recommendations on books, things to read, other organizations that are doing really great work in this area as well. So that's where I would start.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for meeting with me today, Anna, to talk about safe social media use. Just to recap again, we want this is part of our parent education series. In addition to these parent pep talks, we also have live parent workshops where you can meet one on one with one of our clinicians. We have our resource library, which are just one page little tips and tricks. And then we also have our on demand courses. So they take 15 to 20 minutes to complete. And everything is just geared towards trying to make parents' lives a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So all of our content is free, available to use on our website, mopsohio.com. And then once again, thank you to the Columbus Foundation, whose grant funded this entire series. Anna, you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. Bye.